Welcome back to Godly Grounds, where we read, drink, live. I am here with Nathan Razor at the King of the Cosmos podcast, and this is part 2 of our gospel series, where we ask the question, what is the gospel? And we're looking beyond just the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, but how does the Old Testament, Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, all the way through with Jesus' life, and even into the end of the age, talk about the gospel and what application can we make for our own lives. I hope you enjoy.
It really does break me in a way to know that there are people around today, both in and out of the Lord's church, that will suggest that we just simply unhitch from the Old Testament, as if it has no application to us anymore. We're done with that. You have to actually ignore certain passages in the New Testament to have that line of reasoning. I mean, you already mentioned how many times the Old Testament is used as a resource to quote from, to gain greater understanding for something. But, on top of that, Paul says in Romans chapter 15, verse 4, "For whatever was written in former days was written for our instruction, that through endurance and through the encouragement of the Scriptures we might have hope." That's whatever was written before. That's the Old Testament Scriptures. They're for us. They're for our learning, and we can't simply just throw them out.
Yeah. So, Old Testament is this preparing in this gospel forerunning. Kind of like a John the Baptist, a forerunner. I believe Genesis through Malachi was a forerunner into a fuller understanding of who Jesus is, and so when he comes on the scene, he means something. Because I always ask the question, why didn't Jesus come immediately? Why didn't Jesus come the moment Adam and Eve sinned? Why wasn't Jesus sent? And why didn't he die right then? What would it have meant to Adam and Eve? And it's kind of like a spoiled kid who's, done something one bad, he does something wrong for the first time, and all of a sudden you just make it all go away immediately. I think the best thing we can do for our kids sometimes is to kind of let them ruminate in their sin. And what you see is, I believe the history of the Old Testament is you look at God's intervention in a people, in a chosen people, over and over and over and over again. Because what we need to understand from that is we are Israel. We are Adam. We are Eve. There are some people like, well, if I was Adam and Eve, I wouldn't have done that. No, the book of Romans is saying that we are all Adam. We were all born of Adam. And what that is saying is we have all done the same thing, and we all will do the same thing. We will all make ourselves God. Whenever we don't obey God, we become God. Because we think we know better, we think we are better, we think we can do better. And we would never say that, but that's the motivation behind it, of God saying, live this lifestyle, do this, follow me, love me and follow me. And we go, you know what? I'm going to go this way. What are you saying to God? I mean, imagine your child saying that to you. God, Dad, I know what you're saying to clean your room, but I don't think I need to clean it. Really? So this Old Testament is this over and over and over again. Even when they mess up, God's grace is there. God's grace. If you don't see God's grace in the Old Testament, you haven't read it. You haven't read it. And it's God's grace over and over and over and over again. But God's grace without atonement, and this is where we're going to get into Nathan's favorite subject. God's grace without an atoning sacrifice, all it is helping us on the short run. But what can it do for our eternal salvation if there isn't an adequate atonement made for our sins that have separated us from God? What can it do for us?
Yeah. Well, I've always said that there's two things about the gospel that give me personally so much hope, and that's atonement and justification. And when it comes to atonement, look, we all have this problem as presented to us in Romans chapter 3, verse 23. We're all sinners. Yeah. Every single one of us has sinned against God. We've rebelled against him. And deep down in our heart of hearts, we know that that's true. We've done things that we wish 1,000 times over, that we wish we did not do, but we did them. And so we look in Romans 6:23, and the wages of sin is death. Just like any government has their laws that are set in order, if you violate those laws, there's a punishment, there's a fine. And so how does this connect to the atonement? The atonement On the cross, Jesus took the punishment for you and for me. You know, the punishment, the penalty that we deserve, he took for us. And it took blood, and it took his blood, particularly. And it had to be his for different reasons that we'll get into, I guess,
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah. Well, we're probably going to have to turn this into something we take apart and do different parts on. We're trying to keep these under 30 minutes, but I want to read Colossians 1:15 through following, because for me, everything that we've talked about so far comes together in a good summary in Colossians chapter 1. Well, you know what? I'm going to start in verse 9 because that's what I like to do. He says, "For this reason also, since the day we heard of it, we have not ceased to pray for you and to ask that you may be filled with the knowledge of his will." I love that first line. To be filled with the knowledge of his will. Whose will was it that we would be saved in the way in which we're saved? You know, God's will. One, I think he knew and understood there's only one way. You know, I get real frustrated with people when they say, if I were God, I would have done this. No, if you were God and had his knowledge and understanding of human nature and atonement and salvation, you would have done it the same way. Why? Because God knows what's an adequate grace, what's an adequate sacrifice, what's an adequate message that will get people to actually change. I think a lot of the Old Testament is to show us that, you know, these little, you know, I'll give you this nice piece of land that you can live in. I'll give you flowing with milk and honey. You know, I'll protect you from your enemies. Even when they're there protected, what do they still have to deal with themselves? How is God going to protect us from ourselves, from our own sins, our own lustful thoughts, our own prideful thoughts, our own... There's nothing God can do that stops us from seeing that woman and going, you know what? Or seeing that piece of property at somebody else's. Even though I'm living in a blissful state, a blissful land flowing with milk and honey, it's not about physical blessings. And Moses teaches us that. Remember, after the golden calf, right? And God says, you know what? I'm tired of you guys. I'll send an angel before you. You can go and get all the blessings that I promised you of the land. And Moses goes, but God, if you're not there, it means nothing. Like, if you don't go with us, I mean, what's heaven? You know, a lot of people want to get to heaven because, you know, they want the mansion and they want all these things that people have told them and all these streets of gold and all this blood. You don't go to heaven for those are benefits. Whatever that kingdom's going to be like. You know, we're not getting into that discussion today, what heaven will be like. But being with God is why we want to be there, because he makes us whole. Our spirits long to be reunited with the spirit that he gave us, and, you know, wants to be reunited with his spirit. And we want to be I think we'll be whole and complete and one. As the Father is one with the Son and the Spirit, we will join in that unity. Not in the same way, but we will be, you know, we will be with them. And all the blessings that come are cherries on top, bonuses that just come from being in the presence of the Almighty Creator, Father of the universe. So I know I spent, 3 minutes on one verse, but let's keep reading. He says, so that you may be filled with knowledge of his will and all wisdom and understanding, so that you will walk with the Lord in a manner worthy of the Lord, to please him in all respects, bearing fruit in every good work, increasing in knowledge of God, strengthened with all power according to his glorious might, for the attaining of all steadfastness and patience, joyously giving thanks to the Father who has qualified us. You want us to talk about a gospel message, who has made us worthy, in a sense, to do what? To share in the inheritance of the saints in light. For he rescued us from the domain of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of his beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. We were unworthy. As Romans would say, while we were yet sinners, while we were enemies, Christ died for the ungodly. The gospel is all on Jesus. Salvation is all on Jesus. Redemption is all on Christ. Atonement. We just enjoy the blessings of that when we trust that Jesus is our complete and whole sacrifice. He is the gospel. The gospel is not our part. The gospel is Jesus and his part. Our part is just to accept and to obey and to follow and trust. And really, we're still, when we go to heaven, we're hoping that God is going to keep his promise. But our hope, once again, is not like, I hope I'm going to win the lottery. That's wishful thinking. Hebrews 6, verse 19 says, our hope is sure and steadfast and the anchor of our soul. Why? Because God's not a liar. God's a keeper of promises. He's unchanging. When he makes a covenant and a promise on top of it, you can take it to the bank. But still, our trust is that God is going to do that. Because theoretically, God could go, and some gods are like this. Yeah, you've done everything I asked, but now you're not in. It's his plan. He can do what he wants. Now, I believe God's nature is such that he is graceful and merciful and compassionate. And he's not a liar. That's, one of the things that we have hope in is that he does not lie, and trust in that he does not lie. Therefore, we know that what he's asked us to do will save us, not because of what we're doing, but what he does to us when we submit. So I'm going to read 15 through 20, and then we're going to do some discussion on that and probably close out and maybe bring this into another discussion. It says, he, Jesus, is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created, both in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is also the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that he himself will have come to have first place or preeminence in everything. For it was the Father's good pleasure for all the fullness to dwell in him, and through him to reconcile all things to himself, having made peace through the blood of his cross. Through him, I say, whether things on earth or things in heaven. You want to talk about the gospel is, he just brought up creation. He brought up the sustaining of creation. He brought up all things that exist through Jesus, for Jesus, because of Jesus. And then even the redemption that we participate in through the cross was for us, creation, all things on heaven and on earth. The gospel is so much more than just the death, burial, and resurrection. That is the pinnacle. But it's from Genesis to Revelation. We don't even have time to discuss all of the things that the gospel has to offer us. Nathan, I want to end. I know we're probably going to end up 40 minutes today, but our first podcast together, we're working some of this stuff out. I want to ask you a question, and then I'll answer. How has the gospel personally changed your life, and when did it really begin in your mind to really take hold of your life and to change you? Because I was a Christian for many years, but when the gospel actually got a hold of me is differently than when I had this minimal belief in God. Give us your story there.
Well, trying to boil this down as in a concise way as I can, it's kind of hard, but I've said it in sermons before, and Jesse, you know this, and other people know this, but before I was a Christian, I just kind of went to church for whatever reason, because it's just it's what you're supposed to do, is going to church. And so there was one Sunday when I went to church, and it was actually there at Lenore City, and we sung a hymn called "How Deep the Father's Love for Us." Now, not talking about the first verse, different things in there that may cause question. I'm talking about the second verse, and in the second verse is forever where I will identify where my life was changed, period. In the second verse, talks about Jesus and how it was my sin that held him there. And when I sung that and I read the words up on the screen, I just started crying because I knew exactly what it meant. I knew what it meant for the first time in my life. I knew what it meant, that it was my sins, the dirty, nasty, awful things that I had done in my life. It was for that reason that he allowed himself to hang there on the cross. And, my wife, she's sitting right next to me when I'm crying. She's shoveling tissues over at me and everything. It changed my life forever. That is when it happened for me. And of course, after that, I got baptized. I gave my life to him, and I started following him.
Yeah, I remember watching your development in Christianity and your change that had happened. And I will say, out of all the people that I have watched change, yours has been the most dramatic in the sense of how quickly it changed you. And it really, your conversion reminded me of a lot of first century conversions. The moment they realized that they were immersed into Christ and had their sins washed away, it's like that moment. All of a sudden, they're selling all their possessions for each other. They have all things in common. They're meeting, they're meeting, and they're spreading the gospel as they go. And it's an immediate. And for some people, it's like it takes them 20 years, for it to click, and for them to come to understanding, because they half-heartedly sometimes give, or they give, and things of the world start taking back in and creeping back into their lives. And that's what happened for me. I was baptized at a young age. Gave my life to Christ at a young age, and I was at the beginning. It was after church camp. I was excited to be a Christian. I was excited to start, leading songs and doing devotionals and all these things. And I won't give my whole story, but I kind of fell away for about 7 years, just agnostic. Not that I didn't believe in God. I believed there was a God, but you couldn't tell me it was the God of the Bible. And it was somewhere in college. I was going, to school. There was a teacher there who was like, listen, all Christians are dumb and, they're stupid, they're ignorant. And I was like, you know what? I need to figure out whether this is true or not, because I don't want to half hold anything. I either want to be all in or I want to be all out. I mean, I was actually looking to be all out. When I started that pursuit, I didn't want, because even though I was agnostic, I felt that pull of, what does sin do to God? What does sin, sin was still there. And if there's no God, sin means nothing to me. Sin is just whatever government tells me right is wrong, or whatever culture says is right is wrong. It's very subjective. And I could feel better about my sin. And as I studied, man, did I come into a full realization. Then I decided to go to preaching school, and it was in preaching school. I was under Edwin Jones, and we were talking about atonement. We were in Isaiah 53. We were looking at what Jesus was going to have to suffer. And I don't even remember the exact words that he said. It started becoming blurry because I started welling up. And immediately Edwin looks at me and goes, what's wrong? I go, I need to go immerse myself into Christ right now. He's like, what do you mean? He's like, I haven't. I said, no, what I did at 13 was a following of the crowd. There was other people who were baptized that year. I need to go wholly give my life to Jesus. And it was that moment where I found myself in preaching school, where no longer I went to preaching school to prove God right. Now I was preaching to bring the message of Jesus to a lost and dying world. And that shift changed my preaching, changed my studies, changed my life. And I was a slow progression, because I still liked a lot of life stuff. I still liked a lot of things of the world. And it took me a while. And I'm ashamed of that, but I'm also very glad that I kept going. And I am where I am today. And I still have years and years of changing to do and transformation. It'll never be done. But the gospel now has impacted my marriage, has impacted my relationship with my children, my friends. It is supposed to change every area of our life. You can't be a Christian out in public and not a Christian at home, right? Well, I don't really want to, and so we kind of live these two lives, and we need to realize that the gospel is a recreation. We are new beings. We have to die to self, die to the old man, put him to death. And so the gospel is the only thing that has that power. There's no command that has that power. God can't command you to change. God can die for you, sacrifice for you, give everything to you, and in response, it causes you to change. Love and grace and mercy is the center of the gospel message. Everything else becomes easy once you understand that. So with that, I think that's a good place to kind of end our podcast today. Once again, Nathan Razor, one of my beloved brothers in Christ, friends, brother. Love his family, Shawnee and Arabella. We just go check out their King of Cosmos podcast. It's on the Otisville Church of Christ right now, their YouTube page. So if you go to there, you'll find it. I think he may be working on his own somewhere in the future, but right now that's where all his content is. We'll have links And once again, this is Godly Grounds. Read, drink, live. Love you. God bless. Have a great day.